Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to this edition of Daksha Dialogues. I'm Anand Padmanabhan, Dean at Daksha Fellowship, and it's my delight to invite you all to this discussion on emerging careers in policy and law. This is a highly relevant topic for all law students and legal professionals. What with the explosion of policy interventions by the state, or states rather, in our federal setting, and several new career opportunities for well trained lawyers across think tanks, multinational corporations, Indian unicorns, and law and policy consulting organizations. To provide insights today, we have with us a stellar panel. First off, we have Anuja Bose, who is head of research at Vahura. Prior to joining Vahura, she worked in London with a search firm where she was part of the research team. She has completed her MA in Human Resources and Knowledge Management from Lancaster University, and her work at Vahura focuses on looking at market trends in the legal and governance talent landscape. She is also part of the executive search team, whereby she assists in the general counsel, head of public policy, and other searches undertaken by Vahura. Neha Chowdhury heads the policy practice at Ikigai Law, a technology and innovation focused law and policy firm. She advises some of the world's largest technology companies, startups, trade associations, and think tanks on data governance, regulation, and policy, among other areas. She read law at the Harvard Law School and the Nalsa University of Law. Varun Jain is a seasoned corporate, government, and public affairs professional with an expertise in advancing business interests before multiple and diverse stakeholders. For over 5 years now, he has been working closely with in house counsel on various legal and compliance matters, making him adept at handling legal affairs independently. Varun has a mid career master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School and an MBA degree from the Indian School of Business, where he was founding president of Asia's first chapter of Net Impact, a global corporate social responsibility initiative. Recognizing his multifaceted contributions as a board member of Sanskriti Foundation, India's leading cultural and arts non-profit, Varun was selected by the Asia Society to participate in the Asia 21 Young Leaders Summit in 2007. Finally, we have Ritvik Lukos, who's a corporate lawyer turned entrepreneur, a graduate of the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. Ritvik practiced in Mumbai in the leading corporate law firm before beginning his entrepreneurial journey in 2007. He has co-founded ventures in the talent management, online learning, and consulting domains. Ritvik has since exited his other ventures to now co-lead Vahura and Counseling. Before we begin this session, may I remind all of you that all participants in this session are on mute, but you can post your questions and queries in the Q&A tab and we'll take them up at the end of the session. Finally, a word of appreciation to Loctopus for partnering with us for this edition of Daksha Dialogues. So with that, Anuja, if I could begin with you, just around a month and a half ago, you've done a very comprehensive study on various possibilities, career opportunities in the public policy space, and a more broad landscape analysis and mapping. So if you could just share some of these insights that the study has thrown up, I think that could help us set context for the remaining part of this conversation.
Sure, Anand. Thanks for the introduction, and I'll just quickly share my screen and I'll just take everyone through some of our interesting findings through the recent study at Vahura that we've done.
Sure.
Okay. My screen is visible, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So recently, I think this was we published this edition in June. So this was primarily we've looked at trends and everything for the last financial year. So personally, as in professionally in Vahura, we have basically seen a lot of movements and basically increasing demand for public policy professionals, right? Therefore, this particular edition for Vahura Insights, we decided to focus on understanding the reason and the evolved nature of the public policy department overall. For this purpose, we've basically interviewed, we have surveyed professionals across. So it is a multidimensional study that we've conducted. So we have reached out to general counsels who have public policy as their portfolio. We have reached out to head of public policy professionals and also former CEOs, right, who could give us a perspective on what their understanding of public policy departments and corporates is today. So quickly, without any further delay, I'll just run everyone through some of our interesting key findings from this study. Okay. So the first one being 37% of the head of public policy professionals have spent between 0 to 5 years in another function prior to joining the public policy department. This is quite interesting because again, just for the students who are watching it, these are basically your future bosses, right? Typically today, if you look at the policy professional, not everyone comes with a degree in policy field, right? So typically the senior folks themselves, they come from various backgrounds, starting from science, engineering. We see a lot of people from operational background. Marketing and sales was a common one, and journalism, right? Legal background was roughly about 16%, right? So it's not very common, but that is not something that was dismissed completely. So it was quite interesting to see that. Next one, 31% of the survey takers had completed specialized courses in this field. This was particularly interesting because again, as I mentioned, our target audience over here were basically head of public policy professionals. So the fact that they have taken out time and kind of invested time taking up special courses, right, in policy domain is quite interesting to see, right, because they don't come from that sort of a background. But again, today, this becoming a more and more professionalized in a certain way, I guess this is something which is interesting to see. The third one over here is 56% of the survey takers said that identifying suitable talent due to lack of professional degree is one of the top challenges faced by them. This is again quite interesting because today when you look at when we were interacting with the head of public policy professionals, everyone, they are really facing a challenge in where to hire talent from, right? So today, I think the way organizations go about hiring freshers to junior level professionals would be think tank. Think tank is a great place for coaching. Another one which we understand is basically the trade bodies, right? So be it the CII, the FICCIs, the other organizations, Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of professionals are basically picked up from there when they've got like 2-3 years of experience over there. So then they're poached by organizations. So this was interesting to see. Again, this is something which will be changing in coming times, right? Because as we see more and more, like Daksha, for instance, is an institution which is providing specialized subject matter expertise training in this field, right? So this definitely will be changing in time. The next one, 95% of the GCs who are currently managing policy profiles cited that the demand for public policy professionals will increase this financial year. This was again interesting because today, as we see, legal and policy are basically very closely linked, right? So a lot of general counsels today are responsible for managing public policy portfolios as well. So they have people in their team, they themselves are managing. So then we kind of see that demand also according to general counsels, as mentioned on the survey, we found out that that'll increase. 83% of the policy professionals stated that they work closest with the legal team, followed by compliance and PR departments. So this, again, the point that I mentioned earlier, right? So today, legal, we were basically trying to identify as a policy team, right? So who are your key internal stakeholders? 83% of the people who are taking the survey mentioned that basically legal is the team that they work the closest with, followed by compliance and public policy and PR department. So I think earlier, back in the days, just taking everyone back, it used to be, I think the structure used to be that PR used to be the dominant body, right, where public policy would come in. But today that is sort of changing, which brings us to our next point, which I think is, I mean, personally, I thought that this was basically the main point and takeaway from our how public policy as a department has basically evolved today. So because 63% of, I can't even see my screen properly, I'm just going to move y'all up there. 63% of the public policy teams are separate and independent corporate function. So this was interesting, right? Because again, I think when we look back about a decade back, but as I mentioned, it was typically part of another function. But today 63% is a significant number. So they are standalone teams. They are kind of reporting to the CEO directly. The remaining, I think that the second largest was, I think 19% of the professionals mentioned that their reporting is kind of built into another corporate, another department, which was basically, we mentioned legal. So they 19% basically mentioned that they are part of the legal team, and the remaining had matrix and virtual teams. So that is the finding from here. I'll just move on to the next one quickly. Okay. Following what the top three challenges, following what the top three team objectives identified. So we kind of tried to identify today as head of public policy, what is the main agenda, right? What is that they are running with as a team objective? So our findings were quite interesting. Working with the government and regulators in developing positions getting regulated, 92% of the people vouch for this, followed by building perception of the industry or business with the regulators. And then the third one being advising the CEO and the board. 75% of the professionals said that. This was particularly, I think, one of the top takeaway from this particular finding was that today, if you see public policy as a team, is becoming more of a strategic partner, right? Because the other options that we had were more on the operational side, like is it building relationship or is it on the licensing side, on those lines. So those were not the ones that were voted by the public policy professionals. And the first point, if you see, that is the reactive one, working with the government and the regulators, right? The second point, if you see, building perception of the industry or business with the regulators, this is the advocacy piece. This is the one where you're kind of proactively as a department taking a stand in, you know, how the industry should be moving forward. And the third one is obviously advising CEO and board, which again encompasses all three of them. So this was quite interesting to see the objectives are no longer operational in nature for the team. Okay, so this was, let me, okay. So industry trends. So over here, what we have done is, as I mentioned earlier, a part of our study is also we observed the movements. So this was looking at movements across from, I think, 4 years PQE to up until, like, you know, the head of public policy. So we wanted to understand which are the sectors that are currently hiring policy professionals, right? So internet was the highest. 25% of the movements last financial year happened in internet, followed by FMCG, pharma, and so on and so forth. Internet, basically, just for everyone's understanding, it's basically social media, social media, e-commerce, and also the OTT platforms, right? Fintech, everything comes under internet. So, and even for another interesting finding, which I haven't put a slide over here because this is a policy focused one, for legal also, internet was the highest one in terms of hiring last financial year. Okay, the next slide. Industry trends, right? So again, for the industry trend for cross-sector hiring. Again, I think when we started off this study, we thought that typically public policy as a department, as a profession, is very industry and sector specific, right? So we wanted to kind of see, is there cross-sector hiring? Are people moving from IT, ITS to pharma to other sectors? And shockingly, our finding kind of says that basically public policy as a skill set is basically sector agnostic. So therefore, IT, ITS, all the hires that happen in the IT, ITS field were basically from different sectors. So people moved from different sector to IT, ITS. Consulting also same, followed by internet, automotive, all these sectors that I mentioned. So a lot of cross-sector hiring is happening. So you don't need to, like, if you start your career in, you know, FMCG, it's no longer the trend that you will have to stick with FMCG as your core for the rest of your life, right? So which was interesting. The location analysis, this I wanted to put there because again, the typical notion of policy professional is like everyone's based out of Delhi, right? Policy work gets done in Delhi, nowhere else is it done. But if you see this right now, it's basically a quarter of the hires which happened last year were basically not in Delhi. They were in other cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Kolkata, everywhere. So at state level, because I think policy as a matter, as we know, like there are some industries which are basically, for example, transport, liquor, all of these are basically state domain, industry, and the other ones being central level. And also today, as I think policy teams are growing, what we see is, and because they're being able to add value to the business, we see the policy teams, when people are hiring for these professionals, they want them to be sitting close to the business, not necessarily sitting close to the central government as such, right? So this was one of the reasons why I think this is happening right now. So it's going to be more of a pan-India hiring that will take place. No longer everyone who's studying today with Daksha doesn't need to move to Delhi. Anyway, it's an overpopulated city right now. Next one on gender diversity. This was the weak link, right? It's kind of sad to see that, because this is not just senior professionals, this is professionals across. So we seem like only 22% of the hires which happen in the policy government affairs space were basically women, which is quite sad. But having said that, what was interesting also to see that internet, right? Internet hired a lot of senior policy professionals who were women, which is, again, I thought that was pretty good, because typically I think IT, ITS, internet, these are the sectors are thought to be like male dominant sectors. So it was interesting to see a lot of women are kind of entering this field when it comes to this. And the reason why we put this is to see where our lawyers are today. So when we see it was 22% for, in case of public policy, over here it's 44%. It's basically double, right? And this has been a constant, if you ask me. So we've been kind of tracking movements in Vahura for some time now. For the last 3 years, gender diversity when it comes to on the legal space, and especially when I say legal, this is basically in-house lawyers, not really law firm. Law firm, again, there is some bit of disparity, but in the in-house space, it is pretty strong. It is basically uniform, as you can see. It's fairly well-rounded. That brings me to my last slide over here, which is on compensation. So typically at a mid-level, we see someone at a mid-level typically is between a 25 to a 50 lakhs, right? So that's the range. That's what someone is getting paid. When it comes to a senior level, so when I say senior level, it could be someone who is probably head of policy, could be someone who's just at a senior level, will be between a 50 to a 75, right? So this could be either first or second, and basically senior professions within the organization. But C-level, right? This is basis the grade. So this person, like people in this category who are basically, I think, being able to contribute at a strategic level, and it is like important for organizations to be doing those hires. So they are kind of top dollars are being paid to public policy professionals. So therefore it ranges from a 75, it goes up to 1.5, and then ESOPs and everything, it's a different story altogether sometimes. So yeah, in short, I just wanted to quickly, these were the main takeaways from the Vahura Insights edition. For a detailed one, I think we can just copy paste the link. Someone wants to go through it, we can do that. Yeah. I'll just stop sharing my screen now, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Anuja. I mean, this is a pretty comprehensive review of a lot of things that are happening. But I think the most critical insights I would sort of reiterate for now, for this part of the discussion, is the fact that clearly there are going to be more hires, and that is quite reassuring to see. And of course, the fact that, there is a gender imbalance, I think that's a very serious issue. And I think we will have to probe that as to why there is that issue, right? In terms of, there is clearly a government relations angle to a lot of the work that public policy professionals do, and perhaps that's a reason. So, and of course, the third important thing is the sectoral analysis that you've done, and it's good to see that internet, FMCG, and pharma qualify as the three most in-demand sectors for public policy professionals. And it's good to see both Neha and Varun here. I mean, each of them respectively have a lot of experience dealing with public policy issues in the technology sector and the pharma sector respectively. So Neha, if I may just turn to you to set this conversation rolling. I mean, a lot of the questions around why this demand, suddenly, right, for public policy professionals, I think revolve around the pressure points that the industry or the sector are facing, right? And that then leads to these demands. So speaking from the technology and internet space, what are the pressure points that you have seen? And you, of course, personally, you have a very interesting story. You've worked in a think tank and gone abroad, then come back around the time when I think the tech policy space started heating up, but more about all of that later. But from a sectoral point of view, substantively, where do you see the reason for these hires and these demands happening? And you're on mute, so you may want to unmute.
Thanks a lot, Anant, and thank you to you, Daksha, and to the good folks at Bahura for organizing this conversation and for having me here. I think the tech policy story in India, look at it in the initial days as being an extension of maybe the telecom story. And telecom policy, of course, we've been doing in the country for very, very many decades now. But when it comes to internet policy, and this goes back to a conversation that we were having yesterday, I think one of the inflection points would be the way net neutrality and the whole debate around free basics played out in the country. That was really when you saw, I think, multiple factors, including sort of coming together at the same time, including action that a huge foreign big tech company was looking to initiate in the country. The way that civil society perceived this this effort that Facebook was trying to this effort that Facebook was trying to roll out. You had a lot of organizations and rights groups sort of coming together, creating a large scale media narrative, a much more sort of, sector agnostic, reaching out to the citizens kind of sort of, it was a movement in and of itself. And I think that's really, in recent memory, that seems to be one of the most stark events that stands out to me, which then underscored the importance of having people dedicatedly work on public policy issues, whether it's reactive or whether it's proactive, and on or whether on the strategic bucket or the advocacy bucket, like Anuja was talking about before as well. And since then, I think it's only been a little bit of a juggernaut that we haven't seen stop at all, right? Conversations since then have moved on. We've had discussions and debates around Aadhaar, around privacy. We're now talking about regulating, content online, free speech, antitrust issues, digital taxation. So I think since then, it's been one after another after another. And regardless of the sector in which you operate, or even regardless of the vertical in which you are as a tech industry, whether it's health, whether it's finance, whether it's the business of the internet, I think you will find that developments or the thinking of the regulator is, it's evolving extremely rapidly, as all of us are trying to also come to terms with what should be the frameworks to regulate technology. And when that happens, I think you also automatically see a demand for public policy professionals or people that are thinking about a lot of these issues substantively, sort of run alongside it. Yeah.
Right. So Varun, I have the same question for you. I mean, it's a very different sector and also huge federal implications. Unlike technology, which is much more centralized, there's a lot of health policy that happens at the state level. And being at Gilead, for quite a few years, and having driven that, and now as an independent policy practitioner, how have you seen the pharma sector in particular sort of react or respond to these pressure points, and how has that in turn helped you grow as a professional?
Sure, Anant. Again, thank you for inviting me to this panel. Daksha Fellowship, great initiative. And thank you, Ritvik and Anuja, for including me in the panel as well. So health, very quickly, I think the best way to sum it up is that it's the new Bijli Pani from the point of view of government policy making, because, it moves the electoral needle now as physical infrastructure did in the past. But I think security nets and healthcare delivery have kind of moved up the value chain in the voter's mind with respect to what their consciously demanding from the government now. So I think that prism is with which you have to look at healthcare policy making and regulation. So one of the game-changing events, I guess, similar to what Neha pointed out in technology, was the Gleevec kind of denial of patent to Novartis some years ago. That, of course, set the cat among the pigeons as far as the MNC's IP protection aspiration was concerned. But the one I think which I was personally involved with, and also I think became another major case study in life sciences regulation, was the whole price control around medical devices and stents in particular. And that was essentially happening because of a market failure, in the sense that the MRPs of the stents and many other medical devices weren't put in a kind of a rational way, and there was a huge delta between the price at which the hospitals were procuring this and the MRP which was printed on the devices, right? And this kind of, but the way it came about was interesting, and it's has some similarities to the whole net neutrality case study. Is that there was a litigation in terms of public interest litigation from affected consumers. There was a lot of media attention. And then I think there was also protectionist domestic interests which wanted a slice of that pie. So, I mean, in some sense, it was a classic cocktail for any student of public policy or public affairs in terms of how this ammunition came together to catalyze a very sure-footed action from the government of India, led from the PMO down. Right? It was very one of the first things that we were asked to do as government affairs professionals, as an association, was to push back. And actually, in the past there had been some murmuring around this kind of an initiative, and it had been successfully pushed back. But within a few months, it was very clear to all of us that this was not going to go away. This was something that the PMO wanted, and it was, a consequence of various factors that if you had actually sensed this, powder keg brewing, you could have anticipated this much earlier. And I just wanted to mention that point, that I think that's one of the key learnings that I had from that experience, is that you need to have a much larger worldview and mind space in the position of a corporate affairs professional. Therefore, I think I have a slight sort of a difference on the semantics in terms of calling our fraternity just policy professionals, because, like I said, there's such a wide set of stakeholders. There's legal people, there's media, there's civil society. So the set of stakeholders is very large, and I think you have to have your antenna up across all these set of stakeholders. And to me, one of the largest sort of expectations from the role these days is how can you anticipate risks? How can you kind of read ahead between the lines of what's coming up in government statements, social media, civil society actions, judicial action? How do you kind of connect the dots and then paint a picture back to the business, right? That's something that I think traditionally has not been the forte of this function. It's a complex task, but it's also the reason I feel Daksha Fellowship is, hitting on a great product, because you're able to connect the dots if you have the ability to think like a lawyer, think like a policy person, think like a media person, think like a researcher. Connect data in your head, social media, so many feeds coming in. You need to kind of piece it all together in a real-time basis, and then anticipate something that can go wrong. So I'll just pause there. Get into more details later.
Sure. So Ritvik, I mean, this raises some very interesting points there, right? Both what Neha mentioned and what Varun was mentioning about the kind of abilities or skills that are required. And as someone who's facilitating hiring in this space, and this is not just you and Anuja, like this question is to both of you. Like, how do you really see the landscape, sort of evolving in terms of the demands that hirers have of you? And how do you assess candidates? Like, what are the things that you essentially help them look out for?
So I'll break it down in two ways. So while we started with, and Anuja spoke about public policy roles in in-house teams, and I'll let Anuja come to that. But I think for everyone who's on this webinar, corporates are not going to hire a fresher for a public policy role. So I think it's good to kind of make that quite clear. So typically I think we see someone coming at a mid-level, right? So 5 years, kind of around year 5. So then starting out, it's really if you're looking at the variety of ways in which you can start, whether it's a think tank, research kind of institution, academia, litigation. I mean, there are a number of options. Consulting, a law firm that does public policy, and when kind of we speak to the employer, the first thing we get actually, which is in a sense counter to what Varun just said, because a lot of these folks are very focused on some domains, very domain specific. So one of the first things we kind of get is this someone who is deeply curious about this domain, right? Like whether it's criminal justice, whether it's the internet, whether it's healthcare, is this a person who's deeply curious about this domain, and can they demonstrate that curiosity through what they've studied, through what they've written? I think a lot of the interviews are kind of really kind of delving into that. And I think then alongside that, it really depends on what the score, in a sense, activities or strategy is for that organization, right? The mix between research, advocacy, campaigns, litigation, right? So each of these organizations is going to have a different mix about how they approach the space. So I'd say really it's for anyone who's applying for jobs to really ask these two questions. What is the domain that this organization is in? What is their, like, if you were to break up a pie chart in terms of how do they engage with this domain? And then kind of work backwards to say, how do I present my skill sets and my profile and my education to talk to what they need?
Anuja?
Yeah, just to add to what Ritvik is saying, it's basically today, if you see public policy itself, right? Like we spoke about, it's not just about government relationship. It's become much larger. CSR is under corporate, under public policy. Corporate communication nowadays comes under, public policy as well, right? So, and public policy obviously is something which is, government affairs and all of that is a part of it. So I think when a client is hiring, they want to kind of figure out, and business development is also another important part that public policy professionals end up doing, right? To a certain extent, like depending on the need. So I think when someone is applying for a position in any organization, you need to understand what is the priority for that organization at that point, right? Is it basically any of the ones that I made? Is it business development that they're hiring for mainly? Is the priority, more for the CSR team? Or is it mainly like they need someone to be fixing, like taxation issues or, like wastage or e-wastage, like all of those relevant things. So it's important to understand that and then position yourself accordingly. And like Ritvik said, it's very important that you need to be passionate about the industry that you're kind of applying to. Like that is, I think, one of the main things.
Right. So Neha, just to pick on that point, right? I mean, Ikigai is a very strange, law firm in the sense that it's a law and policy firm. It's one of the first really to get into this space, and you guys have, in a very short period of time, created a niche for yourself. And a lot of the points that, Ritvik mentioned and Varun mentioned, you guys are in some sense integrating both, right? There is a deep domain curiosity, while at the same time, I'm sure a lot of your clients really want you to anticipate, because, I mean, the kind of work that you guys are doing at the frontier of emerging tech and so on. So how do you sort of balance within your team this kind of, mix of skill sets? And I'm sure you must be doing a lot of training for some of the younger people who you hire as well. And could you just take us through what you do? Like person A joins your team. How do you sort of handhold that individual and make him part of Team Neha or Team Ikigai?
Thanks, Anand. Um, okay, I think everybody on the team, I think, will do in some combination one of four functions, right? Building on everything that Varun and Ritvik was saying. Like Varun was saying, connecting the dots and giving insights to your clients, anticipating what lies ahead even before, even before it has happened, I think will be one of the most critical parts of this job, right? So staying on top of events as they're taking place, being able to staying on top of events that you see forthcoming 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 1 year down the line, and then being able to anticipate, okay, X has happened, Y has happened, Z has happened, how do they now all speak to each other, and what does this mean for the ecosystem, what does this mean for my client, what does this mean for X stakeholder, 3 6, in the short term, sort of middle term, as well as the long term. And I think that would honestly be one of the most sort of important parts of the gig, being able to provide timely insights and being able to then give advice on, and so but what are you going to do about this, right? Which is the sort of strategic layer that that Anuja was also talking about earlier, which is where that there is this is a likely event that is going to take place, or alternatively an event already having taken place, like India wanting to regulate personal information, for example, or India coming out with new rules on net neutrality regulation, right? Or the Aadhaar judgment of the Indian Supreme Court. Now, this event having already taken place, maybe you anticipated it, maybe you didn't anticipate it, right? But now that the event has already taken place, where do I go from here? What does my strategy look like? Who are the people that I need to talk to? What should be the conversations that I need to have with people? Do I need to explore building partnerships? Do I need to bring together a sort of community? In the more sort of immediate term, what is the impact of a development like this having taken place? I mean, and the questions that you ask could be, it could be a sort of fairly wide universe, and then finding answers to your questions, and then sort of taking your clients to the next step about, this is the sort of plan of action that you have now evolved. And I think at a place like Ikigai, you'll do a combination of these different things, depending on the client, depending on the role that you play within the organization. It will, all of these activities will be in sort of different ratios. If you were coming in at a relatively junior level, if you were joining as a fresher, then like with any other organization, a huge part of the job will involve research and writing, because to be able to join the dots and to be able to make those connections, you're only going to be able to do that if you're constantly reading, and if you're constantly engaging with the ideas, and if you're thinking about them. In a sort of tech policy ecosystem that can get it can feel like there's a lot going on sometimes, because there's constantly movement and there's constantly sort of change that's taking place, and there's so many sort of regulatory developments that are always on the horizon. So internally within the organization, what we also try to do is to have people leading different areas and sort of deep diving and specializing in some areas. There are people who are more interested in data governance. There are folks who are more interested in regulating platforms, competition, online content, fintech, health tech, right? So again, how you arrive at these interests could again be a combination of different factors. If you're at, again, if you have joined at like a relatively junior level, then you just do everything, because you need the exposure, you need to understand what else is out there before you can make up your mind about what it is that you would sort of like to focus on, or what you'd like to do. Sometimes that happens more organically, because once you're working with a particular client or a particular set of clients, then you get more familiar with their issues of interest and their sort of areas of interest. So I think a lot of diversity in the kind of work that you get to do, and I think the specialization sort of happens organically as well.
And in your case, I've also noticed that you produce a lot of knowledge. I mean, the website is and the blog is rife with a lot of information which is shared for free, and it's not so tell us a little more about that whole exercise of creating that brand perception, right? That you are at the frontier of technology and watching out and connecting those dots while
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I think two or three reasons how, or two or three different ways, I think, honestly, in which that came about, Anand. I come from a civil society and a think tank background. I started out working with the Center for Internet and Society, and at CIS, researching and thinking and sort of critically engaging with the issues on which we were working and producing output that could be helpful for the community at large was a huge part of the job, right? That was the job. You were at a think tank, you have to think and you have to write. Um, and I think to me that influenced my thinking to a very large extent. That if you were we also see ourselves as policy researchers. We see ourselves as people who like to engage in depth and substantively with the issues on which we're working. And given that we're doing all of this research, we also like writing about it and putting out the new ideas and engaging with the critical ideas. If we engage with the writing and the ideas that everybody else in the ecosystem does as well. And that was the thinking. That was one of the reasons behind this huge push towards sort of research and writing as well. And on the other hand, I think it's also the idea, like you said, right? It's a demonstration of your capabilities and the credibility that sort of brings you. As a law firm or as a law and policy firm, especially when we were trying to do something new and we were trying to see, trying to create this little niche for ourselves as well, we felt that it was important that our work stand alone and speak for itself, which was also the thinking behind putting out this sort of research on our website. If I come to you and if I have a conversation with you and I claim to be a tech policy lawyer, then I should have a body of work backing the fact that I am actually who I say I am. So, yeah.
No, sounds good. Varun, in fact, coming to you on this whole question of the federal structure, right? And things seem to work very differently when it comes to the states. And as Anuja pointed out in the study, now there is a slight, deviation from the whole Delhi focus, policy making. And I'm sure some of it is thanks to sectors like pharma and maybe FMCG and so on. Because with tech policy, I still see a huge level of centralization in what's happening at the policy level, at least. So how has your experience been working with the center vis-a-vis, and you mentioned the whole PMO experience, right? And vis-a-vis, how you, for instance, work with the state of Karnataka or an Andhra. I mean, how has the change been in terms of adapting your style of working?
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point, because I always call India from a policy point of view, it's the United States of Europe. Clearly, every state government has a different culture, different set of stakeholders, very different bureaucracy also, even though they're all IAS officers, but they tend to have some regional flavor to them, like our cuisines. So, that's been my experience, especially in a sector like health, that the federal polity is very important to sort of keep at the back of your mind when you're developing any kind of a consortium or a campaign or an advocacy initiative. Unless you have all those stakeholders aligned, things get terribly delayed or just don't happen. Because, for instance, in health, the state could always turn around and say, I don't need this. Center may say, okay, you should. I like what XYZ company has in mind, and the state government can just turn around and say, no, don't see value in it for whatever reason. Or it could be the other way around, that the state wants to encourage it, but because there's a opposition government there or some other political reason, the center will kind of put a spanner in the works. So I think your span of stakeholders increases in the case of a federal subject, or what is referred to as a concurrent subject sometimes in our constitution. Transport is another example of that, where, for instance, one of the first companies to start looking at decentralizing policy roles was Uber. And primarily because Ministry of Road Transport and Highways was one stakeholder. But you need to work with Maharashtra police, you need to work with Maharashtra, road transport authorities, you need to work with Karnataka separately. And they were one of the few to sort of start recognizing that, we need to combine a Delhi presence with state presence. I haven't seen that trend that much on pharma, to be honest. I think Uber and some others, maybe in e-commerce, they may have initiated that, and that's it's a model that's almost essential there, because there the public policy team is actually paving the road for the business. They're disrupting a set of rules, legacy rules, and coming up with a new rule book, which has the audience for that is the state government as opposed to the central government. But that's not the case so much in health, because health delivery is state-centric, but the regulation so far is still at the central level in terms of DCGI and NPPA. So many of those roles, I think, will continue to remain in Delhi.
In fact, Varun, I would call you an anomaly. Everything that you said so far seems to indicate there's a great deal of common sense and, on the ground chutzpah that you really need to deliver the job. But on the other hand, you are extremely trained at this job, right? And you have a lot of formal training. So what is the formal training really doing in your case at least, or even more generally? How did the Harvard degree and ISB, of course, it's a management degree, but I'm sure there were elements to understanding this in a holistic manner that ISB to help you with. So where is that training really, so I'm really on the training question, right? Because Daksha at the end of the day is a training program, and we are really trying to train people, but you seem to indicate that a lot of this is common sense, but you are trained. So how do we train?
So, this role in my mind is a lot of art and a lot of science. The art is something that I think has to be learned on the job, or you have innate skill sets or innate attributes which help you do it. The science is something that can be learned. And that's what took me to the Kennedy School. And there are two things that I think a professional degree can do for you, right? One is sort of it's an entry ticket to get into the sector, right, or to get into the profession. In my case, I made a very conscious shift from, like Anuja was saying earlier, I made a conscious shift from sales and marketing for about 6-7 years in IT. Even though I was selling to the government, I made a very conscious shift to say, okay, I want to get into corporate affairs policy now. And how do I do that? Some mentor said the best program around is at the Kennedy School. It has a Harvard brand name, so you have that currency that you could monetize if you were to go down that path. So for me, it was really a combination of, because I was doing this mid-career, it was really a combination of an entry ticket, and it did help. I mean, my first innings was at Honeywell for many years. And I think one of the primary reasons Honeywell took me in was because I had that Harvard training and Harvard certification, right? So clearly, products like Daksha or the Indian School of Public Policy now in Delhi, that will help in sort of taking your credentials to a future employer and saying, I'm interested. What could you do in a program like this is really, how much of that do I actually use at work is debatable. It varies, like Neha was saying, in terms of the kind of work you end up doing, whether it's research, it's a very different skill set. If it's talking to a bureaucrat, it's more of negotiation, it's more of being able to persuade. And I think the point that Ritwik was mentioning about deep domain interest, the way that comes in handy is what I have noticed over the last 15 years in this function, is that you have to be very genuine about those relationships that you cultivate. And that genuineness will come if you're sincerely interested in the cause or the sector. So this kind of correlated, right? I mean, if you're not passionate about an argument you're going to be making in front of a bureaucrat or a minister or a stakeholder, then it won't hold water. And I think that's where I agree with Ritvik that it's a good litmus test from an employer's point of view that if he's not really interested in changing the nature of mobility in the country, then there's no point having him as an advocate. So that's kind of a more of a sectoral choice. But that again, it runs a bit counter to sort of what Anuja pointed out in her study in terms of the sectoral independent sort of agnosticness to the profession, right? That you could be I was in Honeywell and I moved to medical devices. So there, I think the horizontal capabilities I'd say that you need are the ability to build relationships, persuade and advocate effectively. So very strong communication skills. And I would say the ability to inspire consortia, inspire sort of multiple parties to come together towards a common cause. That's something that is essential in being able to shape policy, because government of India doesn't like a representative of one company or one interest guiding their policy. So it has to be a surround sound that you have to create, and that effort requires you to be able to inspire common cause. So that's there's a lot of science to that as well, and I think that's something that can be taught.
So Ritvik, coming back to the study, right, and where there is a lot of promise in the sector at this point, in that function rather, that there is a huge, prospect of new jobs being created, but at the same time, a lot of our students, in fact, there's the looming, COVID threat in their minds, right? There's a perception issue on how are jobs really going to pan out, and of course, one of the standard avenues has been the internship model. And there too, now a lot of internships have just gone the virtual internship route. So, I mean, basically two different questions, coming from Ahura, how do you and Anuja, both of you, assess, the COVID impact on hiring, more broadly among lawyers in that segment, and especially in the policy domain? And the second point is, how do you see the internship route any longer holding good to really assess the merit of a candidate?
Yeah, I'll start with the virtual internships.
Sure.
So what we found is with law firms, actually, it hasn't worked out well with some of the firms that is our clients. And one of the reasons has been, I think, discomfort around confidentiality and access to live matters. And I think in some cases where clients have requested that interns not work on this, not be involved, especially where the matter is sensitive. So then what happens is that the work that's given to the intern then becomes work of, work that's not really involved in, what the firm really does, right? And then the chances then of getting a job in that firm will reduce because the firm doesn't have a real appreciation of what you've done. So I think that's unfortunate. But with, I think in the policy space with research centers, think tanks, I think there it's worked really well. And I think at least the folks that we've been talking to said it's worked well. But I think what everyone prefers is that these virtual internships are approached in the same way as you would approach a regular internship, which means you set aside that chunk of time. It is a proper, 6 hours, 8 hours a day. So it has to be done well. So you have to assign, a mid-level person in the team with the intern to work on it. So I think where there are no confidentiality concerns, it's really working well. But in other cases, it's
There is a
I think the issue with broadly, I think research centers, think tanks, etc. It is a disaggregated space. See, at Bahura, we operate really at the mid-level and senior level, so we're not directly involved at the junior level, but it is still disaggregated. So you have to really, there is no really one platform to go to where you can find all the jobs and you can apply. And I think a lot of the questions in the Q&A were around that. How do I go about finding a job, where can I go? Really, you have to work backwards from, you have to pick a few areas, you have to pick a few domains, you have to pick a few kinds of organizations, do your research. Anyway, you want to be a public policy professional, right? Research is a core skill. Networking, relationship management are core skills. So think of this as, as testing yourself to, whether this is a domain for you in this exercise as well. And then really, I think everyone in this space does public postings and are very clear about the application process. So I think a few tools like just setting up a Google alert, to be aware, follow people on social media, attend webinars like this, attend platforms. The jobs are out there, but you have to go to them. It won't come to you.
Anuja, would you like to add? Anuja, would you like to add anything to this?
I think her internet is.
Actually, yeah, while she's coming back on the conversation, Neha, if I could just request you to weigh in on some of the questions here which you have indicated.
And I think just to add to what Ritvik is saying, I think for internships and all, I mean, at Vahura, that is, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Now you are, but I think there's some slight lag. Perhaps you could turn off your video and try. But you're on mute now. Oh, he's dropped. Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, now you're.
It never acts up, but clearly today
it's
perfect day. Anyway, I think like just advice to the students, right, looking for internships. At Vahura, we do not do too much of junior level hiring, but I think the one way to go about it is, again, as Ritvik and I think everyone mentioned, that passionate about the area that you want to work in, right? So you need to have ideal companies. You need to have target companies that you want to approach, right? So be it like, if it's Varun Jain who you want to work with and you've kind of followed him, please then write to him directly. Say that if there is some kind of work that you could outsource, because as we know, policy does have a lot of research work, right? And those are the ones which we would imagine, and a lot of analytical and mathematical stuff which may not be confidential, right? One would imagine. So those are the work that I think one can, because right now, when we're speaking to senior policy professionals, they are swamped with work, right? There is so much work that they are doing, because right now is a time where I think all this while policy teams, everyone didn't know that these people existed in the team, because business was going smooth, nothing was affected, nobody cared about them. As such, like visibility wasn't very high. But right now, like because of COVID, because of everything else, there is a need and there is a lot of work for the policy department per se. So they may not have time to post jobs and say like, look here, we are looking out over here. But if you target and reach out to people individually, that may be something which may work out for you.
So Neha, turning to you, there's one question before. You had indicated that you would like to respond to one, but before that, there's one question which I think you're best placed to respond. What are the primary strategies used by public policy professionals to influence regulators in achieving a certain agenda of your organization? This is addressed to both you and Varun. Neha, would you like to begin?
Sure, I can, but I honestly think Varun would be best placed to answer this, because we don't do a lot of the regulator facing work ourselves. A lot of our work happens much more sort of behind the scenes, where we come in helping organizations strategize for, sort of think through the various bouquet of options that they have in front of them, and sort of creating playbooks, I would say, for how each of these scenarios would play out. But I think, and I think there's a whole range of different ways in which organizations choose to sort of engage with regulators. A lot of them prefer to do their advocacy sort of one-on-one. A lot of them do put out sort of public-facing statements. A lot of the work happens through industry associations. Sometimes you build sort of partnerships with think tanks as well. So I think there's a whole sort of range of options, but we really operate much more on the sort of back end. So I'll defer to Varun.
Okay, Anand, can you repeat the question? I was referring online questions.
Yeah, so the question is basically, what are the primary strategies used by public policy professionals to influence regulators in achieving a certain agenda for your organization?
So I would say the first thing is to get a seat on the table. And I think for that, you need to have an independent relationship with the key officials there. So for instance, if you're talking about in health, DCGI and PPA, the heads of these organizations should know who the company is, they should know what the mission or the narrative of the company is. And they should know ideally you and the head of your organization, right? In terms of the person attached to this narrative. Once you've done that, I think then you need to use other levers, which, like Neha said, are basically associations are, I find, very potent to be able to carry your message as an industry. If your objective is aligned with the industry, which by and large it is. If it's an individual objective, then of course you have to carry water yourself. And for that, I found white papers and kind of non-papers to be very useful in terms of just helping the government mobilize their own machinery of the file. Unless something there's a file in the government, nothing moves, right? So to get that file moving, I think you have to do the initial heft of the thought leadership to get the ball rolling. And that is essentially, demands a lot of research and conversations ahead of tabling that white paper to align the message so that it's well received.
Neha, there is a question that you had. This is the entry level in tech policy in CIS, Ikigai. How does one build the right credentials for an opportunity for an entry level in tech policy at CIS, Ikigai, Internet Freedom Foundation, etc.? There's a question.
Look, I don't think this will be any different from, and maybe the folks at Bahuda will have a different sort of perspective on this, but at least from where we come from, right? It's demonstrable interest for sure in the subject matter. Would definitely, it's not critical, but if there's a large sort of pool of applicants, you are considering also just how focused Ikigai law is. From a large pool of applicants, that would definitely be one of the differentiators, I would say. I would be more inclined to look at a resume that had a demonstrable interest in technology law and policy, if I was considering somebody. But other than that, I think it's getting the basics right. I think we look for we largely expect people to be able to do two things: to be able to do research and to be able to put in the hours to do the research. So depth of research is critical, and to be able to communicate well and to be able to communicate clearly, which then comes down to sort of research and writing, and sort of everything that it encompasses, right? So from a lawyer's perspective, being able to construct an argument, being able to demonstrate how you're able to think through the argument and sort of take it through to its logical conclusion. Writing is a little bit tricky, honestly, in the Indian environment, because I don't think our law schools equip us necessarily for the kind of very often business-facing writing that a policy job requires. And I'm really hoping that this is one of the things that the Daksha Fellowship will be able to come in and sort of do, right? More sort of practical on-the-job training in terms of what the industry needs and what is the gap that is that I personally felt having graduated from one of the law schools here. So I think that's what it comes down to. We don't internships are great. Are a great way to sort of showcase interest. Participation in extracurricular activities are a great place to showcase interest. I've been looking at some of the answers that Ritvik has also been posting on the chat, and I think I agree. Nothing, no like secret sauce or anything, just the basics of research writing, and that's about it. Yeah.
I mean, good that you highlighted writing, because that's something that we too have been very clear that we could focus on in our curriculum. So we have a full-fledged communication lab. And the idea is that we get not lawyers, in fact, people far removed from the legal profession, like, for instance, Samanth Subramanian is a visiting faculty. And the reason is we want people like that who thought very differently about the water tank mafia or the face mask industry, COVID, to really tell, teach our students how do you write in a simple, lucid manner, and almost really storytelling, right? And so that's the other part that we are also highlighting, the narrative or the art of storytelling. So there are some videos up on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But coming back to you, Ritvik and Anuja, I would let you guys have the final word, because you guys are really doing all the research and thinking around jobs in this particular sector. So like a quick roundup, because we are well past time, of where do you see the opportunities in a nutshell? Of course, your study is, really capturing a lot of it. And the second thing, of course, is how would you advise students to use this time, right, which is a time largely going to be spent at home, and digital learning and all of that, to really use this time to build up the right kind of skills, for this particular kind of role and what is required.
I'll start, I think, with just, I think it's good to look at which are the hot sectors or segments from, both kind of from a civil society perspective, like I think, or give a great example. I love the phrase of, healthcare now being Bijli Pani, so there are certain things that are now, that have reached a certain crescendo, right, in terms of attention. The other is, where is funding going also? Where is funding going sector-wise? Because that is also driving where jobs are going to be created. In a scenario now where, certain sources of funding that were not available earlier, means that some parts of this ecosystem will get more funding than others. And if that's an area that you're very interested in, that's always a good match. The other is, I think, and I think that shows also in the study. I think if you look at internet, FMCG, pharma, that shows even in the corporate world. Anuja, just any other points?
Just to add to what Ritvik is saying, right? I don't have any short-term suggestions or anything of that sort, but I think one of the things that we have observed interacting with policy professionals, right? One of the skill set and mindset, which is, I think, very important, is overall relationship-driven mindset. When I say relationship, I don't really mean relationship with government professionals, right? I mean like relationship internally, right? Because if you want to be in this industry, if you want to build your career here, you really have to get work done working with your with the different functions, right? Be it the marketing function, be it the CEO, be it the finance, legal guys. So relationship internally, relationship externally. And another thing that we've observed, right, at Bahura, when we interact with policy professionals, is a relationship with peer, right? So they have a very community sense of being, right? So there is everyone sort of knows everyone, everyone's looking out for everyone. It's not that sort of a vibe is there. So I think you need to have that sort of a mindset to be successful in the long run in this basically area.
Yeah, on a lighter note, Neha and I are both members of multiple WhatsApp groups on technology policy. So I guess we all understand this whole aspect of, like for instance, it is never, even though I have in some sense exited to things on at the frontier of education and tech policy, I still get a lot of interesting queries around, data protection and technology policy. And what is that select committee doing and so on. So even if you leave tech policy to some measure, it never leaves you fully. So anyway, so on that note, I thank you all, for taking your time out on a working day evening, and to really inform and enlighten our students on the best ways in which they can take their career forward in what is clearly a very vibrant area for job creation, and where there is a lot of interesting and exciting possibilities for them. And I do hope that the Daksha Fellowship turns out to be one of those possibilities that can help them, discover the inner policy wonk them and take their career forward and help them in that regard. For those of you interested in the program, do check us out at dakshafellowship.org.